Hello and welcome to another episode of What the Folk. We've got a name at last. This week I'm continuing on our theme of giants from last week, which will hopefully continue through the month. This time I'll be doing a reading from the Richard Barber Anthology of British Myths and Legends, published in 1998. I'm reading from the Folio Society edition, because I be fancy like. The myth I'm reading today is The Giants of the Island of Albion. Now, this is a 14th century myth in origin, though it does go back, from what I've read, to about the 4th in various forms. The 14th century myth is an extended form of an earlier myth. The best account of the shorter form appears to come from Geoffrey of Monmouth in his History of the Kings of Britain, relating to Brutus of Troy. And the 14th century edition appears in both an Anglo-Norman version and a Latin version, both from the 14th century. Strangely, it appears in three forms: a octosyllabic Anglo-Norman poem, a prose short Latin form, and a long prose Norman form. Now, the version I'm reading from today is obviously a prose English form that was a translation by Richard Barber. This is about the origin of the first peoples of Britain, so I hope you enjoy this reading. Here you may learn how the great giants first came to occupy this island, their number and origins. They were the first to occupy England, which was first known as Albion. Now listen carefully and I will tell you in brief the whole story of the giants, just as I heard it from a wise man, who was well versed in writings about adventures of former times. 3,970 years after the creation of the world, there was a powerful king in Greece, who was so brave and noble and proud that he held sway over all kings. He had a beautiful, well-bred queen, by whom he had 30 daughters, every one of them very beautiful, and they were all brought up together. The father and mother were tall, and the children grew up like their parents. I cannot tell you their names, except for that of the eldest, who was a very tall and beautiful girl called Albina, and when they were all of age, the king and queen gave all their daughters in marriage to kings of high rank. But though each wedded a king, and was a queen in her own right, through pride and temper they plotted a great crime. They did not think that anything could go amiss with their plan, but gathered together and took secret counsel, and they agreed among themselves that none of them should be subject to the authority of anyone else, whether it was their lord, their neighbour, their brother, their cousin, or any other lord. But our husbands keep us in subjugation all the time and rule over us just as they please. They were the daughters of the great king, and never submitted to anyone, nor did they wish to. Nor did they wish to have any master, nor be forced to do anything. Rather, they wanted to rule over their lords and all they possessed. The idea that no one should command them was pleasing to them all, and as they did not want to do as their lords wish, obeying them and performing all their desires, they made a pact and swore an oath that each of them would kill their lord on the same day. When he came to her privately and embraced her and looked for solace, they set a day to accomplish this, and all agreed, save the youngest, who did not want to harm her lord as she loved him greatly. When their council was over, they all returned to their various countries. The plot did not please the youngest at all, for she loved her lord, and had given herself to him. She in no way wished to see her lord harmed, but while she was at the meeting and dared not contradict her sisters, because if she had said anything against them, they would have murdered her on the spot. As soon as she came home and saw her lord, her grief increased, and when he saw that she was sad, he asked her what the reason was. The gentle lady fell at her lord's feet and begged him for mercy. She asked pardon for her sin, and told him of the treachery which her sisters had plotted, and how they had sworn to kill him against her will. Her lord took her in his arms and kissed her, and solaced her more than he had ever done so before. "Lady," he said, "be at your ease, and forget your sorrow." The next day at dawn he dressed to go to her father and speak with him, and he told his wife to get ready to go with him. They did not delay a moment, but both made their way to her father, the king of Greece. The king made them very welcome, and they told him exactly what his daughters had been up to. He was so dismayed what his youngest daughter told him that he sent out a summons to them all, commanding them to come to him at once. When they were all present, the king accused them of treason, and of maliciously plotting the death of their lords. To their great dishonour, the ladies were dismayed by the accusation, and by the treason which they had been prevented from committing, which they would always be guilty. Each tried to clear herself on oath, but they could not contradict the charges. Their husbands were so furious that they wanted them all put to death. Their father, who was equally angry, cross-examined them, so that nothing remained hidden, and everything that had been decided at their council was revealed. He convicted them all of their enormity and wickedness, save the youngest, who had told everything to her lord, and was greatly honoured by him thereafter. When all the sisters had been convicted of that grievous crime, they were seized by their father and their husbands, and shut up in a dungeon for their iniquities and evil. They suffered greatly there as they waited for judgment, as was ordained. But the judges were wise, because the accused were of noble birth. The judges did not wish to dishonour the family of their mother and father, who held such wide domains, nor the families of the lords of rich lands who had married them. Therefore they did not condemn them to death, but ordered instead that they should all be exiled from the country of their birth forever, without hope of returning. Nor was there any appeal from this judgment, whether they liked it or not. They were led in sorrow, without any one to help them, to a seaport which was nearby. All I can tell you is that they were taken and put in a large, well-founded ship, without rudder and without provisions. They wept bitterly, but no one took pity on them, because the crime that they had plotted was so terrible. The ship was pushed out to sea, the waves tossed it hither and thither, and it was in great peril as it drifted away from the land. The sisters were all in great sorrow, exiled from the country where they had been queens and lived in luxury. Now they were poorer than nuns. They did not know what would become of them, whether they would live or die. These women suffered much. The ship was driven by chance, buffeted by great winds, and menaced by the waves. But none of this was as bad as the hunger that gnawed at them, for they had nothing to eat. Yet the danger made them lament pitifully and forget their hunger. They were tormented on all sides, and were ready to die, for a gale got up, and the sea rose to storm, with huge waves which lifted the ship up, and then brought it down again, turning it round so much that the women fell on the deck and lay there for 3 whole days and nights without moving, as if in a trance. Meanwhile the storm carried them onwards, until they were near the shore. When the storm ceased, the weather became clear and calm, and the ship had been driven so far west that it came to a land which is now called England, though in those days it had no name, because no one dwelt there. When the tide went out, the ship lay on the shore. At this the women woke up and lifted their heads. They were overjoyed to find themselves so near land, and at once left the ship where they had suffered so much. But the eldest sister hastened to be the first to leave and take possession of the land. She was called Albion. The others came out of the ship, weak from pain and fasting they had undergone at sea. They all sat down, and the great hunger which they had forgotten came back. They were hungry beyond measure, and thought of nothing else, even though they did not know where to find anything to eat. In the end they ate raw herbs which they found in great plenty, and fruit which was on the trees. Acorns, chestnut, and sop apples kept them alive. They found plums, and braces, and pears, and apples, and this was all the food they ate. They were all very anxious, for they did not know where they had landed, what the country was called, or whether it was at peace or at war. They had to stay there, for there was nowhere else they could go. When they had recovered their strength, they explored the country to see what kind of people lived there, and what sort of life they led. Although they searched everywhere, they found no human beings, either in the woodlands, the plains, the valleys, or the hills. There was neither man nor woman, and this astonished them. Nor could they find any sight that man had been there. But they found fine forests and woods, and many wild beasts, plenty of fowl on the land, and rivers full of fish, bordered by delightfully flower-filled meadows, and wild birds sang loudly in the woods which gave them comfort. When they realized that they could never return home, and that the land which they had found had never been inhabited by man born of woman, for it was open and deserted, Albina, the eldest sister, said, "We have been exiled from the land where we were born. We know we have deserved our punishment, and we will never return. Such is our fate, but fortune has given us this land. I should be acknowledged as its ruler, for I was the first to take possession of it when we left the ship. If anyone has anything to say against this, let them, and do so now." They all agreed the land should be hers. Then Albina said, "We do not know the name of this land, or if it has ever had a lord. As I am now its ruler, it should be named after me. Albina is my name, so it shall be called Albion, and our shame shall always be remembered here. We have to remain here, nor should we want to go anywhere else, because the land is full of good things, even though we lack meat. They were very eager to have meat. It was their heart's desire. They saw plenty of wild animals and birds to tempt them, and would gladly have eaten them. They could have laid hands on them. They all tried to think of how they could catch a wild beast or bird, of which there was no shortage. They knew how to hunt from their days when they were queens, and they knew the lie of the land. But they had neither bow nor arrow, falcon nor hound, with which to catch their prey. But they were cunning and clever, and after much thought they built more than 100 traps, made from rope with creepers, and caught deer with them. They made traps from twigs to catch fowl, and they made other such devices which deceived both bird and beast, and caught many of them. When they had caught what they had wanted, they skinned the deer and lit a fire by striking stones together. There was no shortage of firewood. They cooked the beast in their skins and roasted them over the fire, both the deer and the fowl which they had caught. They ate them gladly, drinking clear water from the fountain. This way of life sustained them so well that they regained their strength, recovered completely from their adventures, and grew fat on their new diet. The heat of nature overcame them, and in their lechery they longed for men to make love to them, a common enough temptation. Evil beings called incubi saw this. They are spirits which have the power to take on human form, and they mingled with women and give them such delight that they lie with them and make them pregnant, and then disappear. So it happened with Albina and her sisters, when desire overcame them. The evil spirits were ready to fulfill their wishes, and all of them coupled with the incubi. They gave birth to children who became giants and held the land after them. But when the incubi had gone, the women could find no one to play the man's part with them. So when their sons came of age, they wickedly begot sons and daughters on their own mothers. Sisters bore children by their brothers, and all of them grew to great stature. They were exceptionally large and tall. The huge bones which can be found in many places throughout the world are evidence of this. Men dig them up in both the country and the city. Teeth, legs and ribs, and thigh bones 4 feet long, shoulder blades as large as a shield. Many people are perplexed by this, and wonder if there had ever been men with such huge skeletons. The giants were hideous to look at because evil spirits had begotten them. Their fathers were devils, and their mothers were tall and well built. They were just the children you would expect from such a union. This fairy race multiplied greatly and spread throughout the land, making caves in the ground and raising huge walls and ditches. They preferred to live in the mountains. In many places you can still see the great walls which they built, though many of them have been battered down by storms. This race held the land until the Britons came, which happened 1136 years before our Lord was born. I'm sure of this. From the time when the women came who first held the land until the arrival of Brutus, who took the land by force and changed its name from Albion to Britain, 260 years elapsed according to this chronicle. All this time the giants held the land, but as their race multiplied, they each took a different part of the land and made it their stronghold. They lived each for himself so proudly and wickedly that every one of them tried to overcome the others, trusting to his own strength and despising the rest. They all strove to conquer the whole land and become lord and master. And the civil wars which resulted, they slew each other until only 24 remained. It was they who came to fight Brutus when he first landed, but Brutus soon overthrew them all, except for their leader, Magog, whose life he spared, for he was amazed by his height. He was 20 feet tall, and wanted to find out how his race had come to the land, and what his lineage was. He told Brutus the whole story of how his ancestors had arrived, and what had happened, and how long they had held the land, just as it had been passed down, and as he had heard it from his elders. And Brutus made a record of it, so that others might know of it afterwards, and make a story of it to tell at high feasts, so that the marvellous story would be remembered. Now you've heard the true story about those who first came to England and held it, and what the island's name was, and who bestowed it, and how long it was held before the Britons came and changed its original name and called it Britain. It will never hurt to know the tales and writings of ancient adventure. May God bless him who sets them down in writing. The end. I hope you enjoyed that.